to SteelMint events. I'm Ruchira Singh. In the month of March, a great big national lockdown was announced, which sent almost every single market plunging to their lows. So the steel and the iron market was no such exception. It fell badly. But since then, data is showing a pretty smart recovery in both of these markets. So if you take the data and if you see the sample, in the month of June, production of finished steel rose by 16%, and the consumption rose by 13% compared to the previous month. So that's quite telling. All of India has been talking about a V-shaped recovery, and this is quite evident in our own markets. But now, where do we go from here? So was this really pent-up demand that was showing in the sales in these months? Or does this rally really look like there is some kind of legs to it that it'll rise further? July data also, early data that is coming in shows that there is some kind of a rise. So to answer some of these questions and also to alert us to what is on the horizon, we have our webinar today, and our webinar is titled, How is Indian Steel Demand Panning Out Post-Lockdown? So our panelists are eminent executives, both in the steel production side and also the steel consumption side. And I'd like to introduce them all to you. So our first panelist is Mr. Sunil Kakar. He is Executive Director, Supply Chain at Maruti Suzuki India Limited. Our next panelist is Mr. G.L. Gupta. He is President, Group Procurement and SCM at Kalpataru Group of Companies. Our next panelist is Mr. Vinay Shroff. He is EVP Sales and Marketing at JSW Steel Limited. The next panelist is Mr. Ranjan Dhar. He's Chief Marketing Officer at ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India. And also joining me is Nikita Baid as my co-host. I'd also like to welcome the participants that have been in the plus of 500 registrations for this webinar, and about 500 of you might be registered and might be listening to us. Thank you very much for joining us. So the flow of this webinar is as follows. So we first have a 5 to 8 minute talk by each of the panelists. And after that, we have a Q&A session between myself, Nikita, and the panelists. And after that, it'll be your turn to throw in your questions. So you can put them down in the Q&A box down below on your window. Be sure to identify yourself by giving your company name and also your full name. And you might like to wait until much of the discussions are over so that what you ask is not a repeat of what we may have already asked. So that's that for the day. And I'd like to hand over to Nikita to introduce the very first speaker. Over to you, Nikita.
Now, without further ado, let me introduce our first panelist, Mr. Sunil Kakar from Maruti Suzuki India Limited, heading the supply chain vertical as an executive director. He is also director in the board of Plastic Omnium Auto Energy Limited and Hand Climate Systems India Private Limited. One of his very renowned research paper has been supply ratio analysis for GIT environment. Mr. Kakar, please tell us about the opening remarks and give us a scenario that how the post-lockdown scenario changed for the Indian auto sector in terms of sales, capacity utilization, and what is the short-term outlook?
Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everyone. I think it is my pleasure to speak with all of you through this webinar. I think I would like to thank SteelMint for organizing this webinar to keep the industry professionals connected and also updated each one of them and on the market scenario in the current very, very dynamic. And first of all, I hope and pray that all your family members and friends, colleagues are safe and they are doing fine as far as health is concerned. Now, I think all of us have witnessed this, the kind of crisis which we are facing right now, the magnitude and in terms of any precedence has never been there of such kind of pandemic which we have really faced in the recent past. So that has not only affected our personal lives, but also has affected the economy, businesses, and a lot of things across the globe, I would say. So this COVID-19 pandemic has compelled people all over the world to make the changes in the way they were working, The one which we are already witnessing, that we are talking through webinars. And since the first lockdown has happened, and subsequently when unlockdown was announced by our Prime Minister, safety and health of our employees had been the major and one of the foremost objective of our organization at Maruti Suzuki. So what we had done was that during the lockdown period, we had discussed with all our major suppliers, and we had developed some guidelines and SOPs on how to get prepared once the things really get open. So right from the operator level to the top, right from the home to the factory and then to the back when they're returning to home, how do we take care of all the precautions as far as and the way they have been adhering to it? That is how probably we are finding that even in case of number of cases at our suppliers and have been quite limited and contained. Now, if we see, of course, when the lockdown happened, everybody was a little puzzled, and probably economic conditions were predicting that recovery may not happen fast, and it might happen that another 6 to 8 months, we will have only marginal recovery and things will not be so good. But once it has opened, we have seen that the overall, as far as the requirements of cars are concerned, so the sales and the booking, that has been really a big surprise to us. In a real good number of bookings which has happened. So probably what we have seen, and one of the reasons which we can relate to it, is that maybe it is a partly pent-up demand, because 2 months there was no business, and as such, as per the requirement of people, maybe this was a pent-up demand. Second, one of the reasons which we are also feeling is on account of movement from public transport, which is almost now nil in terms of metros and public buses. So people are resorting to the personal transport. So that is the change which we have already seen, that in terms of smaller cars, like whether we are talking about Altos or we are talking about Espresso, Swift. So those are the vehicles which are in big demand and under big inquiries. If we talk about the production level, that has been the major, I would say, bottleneck. For the first time, that sales is saying that we can absorb more and more from the market and the requirement point of view. But producing so many numbers immediately after a lockdown of such a almost more than 60, 70 days is a big challenge. So our production team, along with the HR, had been working on various SOPs within the plant for safety. And also in terms of social distancing, or whether one shift people have to go, then we have to keep a gap of one hour, 2 hours, then the next batch can come. So all these things have also resulted in the productivity loss. So when we are finding that in case of July, if we see the overall sales number, when we have just finished, we are finding that it has almost reached the same level as last year, which is a very, very positive sign. And what we are further seeing, that probably in August and September, the volume is further going to grow. Just to give you a few numbers, like we have been making more than just over 1 lakh cars we have made in the month of July. And now in the month of August, we are targeting 115. And the month after that, we are talking about 145, 1,45,000 cars, which is almost very close to the pre-COVID time when we were producing around 150,000 cars. So that is the kind of ramp up and the speedy recovery which has happened, which certainly by all means is a very positive welcome from the industry point of view and the entire supply chain, including, I'm sure, steel industry will also be happy that as an automobile, we are growing at that rate at Maruti Suzuki. But only challenge which we have to really see, that keeping in view all these precautions, keeping in view the current situation where, again, just now before this, I was attending another webinar with the DC of Gurgaon, where they are talking about 10% testing has to be done mandatorily for all the industries. So these kind of extra activities and challenges are still there. So we have to really see how quickly we can improve the productivity, and absenteeism wise, maybe if we have to hire new people, how they can be trained. So those kind of challenges we have to really see. But I'm sure once the pull is there, each one of us is definitely going to run, and we are going to run and meet the target also. So this is the current situation which we have. But what is the sustainability? That is the biggest question mark. That is it going to sustain only for a few months, or it is going to sustain and further grow the way we were projecting even in our vendor conferences. We have been talking about 5 million cars by 2030, and those kind of projections we are already given. I'm talking about last year, May, when we had the conference in Macau. So what is the sustainability? I think we at Maruti strongly believe that the fundamentals of the country are still strong. So what are some of the factors which determine the car sales? One of the definite factor is GDP growth, which is important for people to have money to buy the cars. So that we strongly feel that with the kind of government we have in place, and once they have defined the US $5 trillion economy, maybe initially they have defined by 2025. It may not happen now because of the current situation, but it will only get delayed. That is our feeling. So even if it gets delayed by 1 or 2 years, in terms of our preparation and overall industry, I think we need to be really working hard. Another thing which is important is the role of like penetration of cars as far as the population is concerned. That still remains quite low, which is at a level of 22 per thousand. So that gives another indicator that in any case that need or demand of people have to be met. When we talk about countries, I would not say very developed countries because there the ratio is almost 500 per thousand people. But even if we talk about neighboring countries, they are much higher than others. We talk about China, they are still much higher than others. So gradually, I think we have to cope up with the current challenges of COVID. But certainly the way economy is going to move, our initial projections might only get delayed by a year or so. So that is, I think, very important thing which we feel. So as far as steel industry is concerned, I think at this forum, I would also request that in terms of your investment plans, in terms of your expansions, we feel that probably it is not a big worry that we have to put immediately the brakes to those kind of investments, or we have to be really have some knee-jerk reaction. Probably that is not required, and with the current visibility, that does not seem to be so. So for us, I think it is very important that our continuity of supplies and demand for steel, and more important, I think, is also your role in our steel supplies should also enhance. Which I mean to say is that in terms of special category of steels, which we are still importing and resorting to China and some other countries, it is always good with the Prime Minister saying very clearly about Atmanirbhar policies to be maintained. I think now steel industry has to put a next big step by ensuring that anything which can be made outside can definitely be made inside India also. So for that, we are quite open for any kind of discussion, support, collaboration. But finally, I think localization of steel also remains one of the key factors going forward as far as our expectations are concerned. So basically, conclusion, I would just say that as far as Maruti is concerned, we are bound to grow, and we are on track. Mostly our readiness is there to meet the demand which is there in the market. And we strongly feel that this demand is going to remain. So we have to be only growing and pursuing our goals. So that is the thing I thought I'll share in the beginning. So,
Right.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kakar.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next speaker, it's Mr. G.L. Gupta. He's president of Group Procurement and SCM at Kalpataru Group of Companies. And some brief lines of introduction on him. He is responsible for procurement and supply chain management for all group companies of Kalpataru Group. This includes EPC, buildings and infrastructure, industrial, oils and gas, railways, transmission lines, and much more. His past job was with the Reliance Group, and it was similar. He held a vast array of portfolios. So he was looking after procurement for infrastructure, power, defense, metro, sealing. So he has 29 years of experience in the industry. So Mr. Gupta, it's over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ruchira. So I would like to thanks SteelMint for giving us this opportunity. You see, we can discuss with our peers, our customers, our suppliers. So I would like to say thank you to everybody on behalf of the Kalpataru Group of Companies. You see, I just would like to mention that, you see, we all know that in this light of COVID pandemic, there is a huge significant shift in global steel landscape. Apart from China, you see the major steel producers of Japan and then US and India. So almost there was a reduction of 25 to 30% reduction in the steel demand. and particularly in this Q1 of this financial year also. Due to that, you see, China steel exports have been down by 15% on year-to-year basis, and then again, South Korea exports are also down by 7%. If we take a look from from the March where this COVID has impacted all of us, so we started our unlock journey since only last month, and the steel demand is steadily increasing even with ongoing monsoons. Generally, you see there is a decrease in the demand during the monsoon, but we can see a clear shift in the monsoons, particularly for these 2 months. The demand from from Q2 to Q4 is definitely going to be higher, just to cover downturn of the Q1. And you see, we can see a 20% higher demand than the last year during the monsoon season. In my opinion, you see, this situation presents a unique kind of opportunity to all the domestic steel players to increase their capacity utilization and to bring down their operating cost, and you see, they can just maintain healthy margins, and then that is how we can have a domestic competitive pricing. As far as our group is concerned, so maybe you see, we are thankful to the government. You see, there are certain kind of policies and thrust towards certain sectors, which particularly includes highways, railways, water, tunneling, and then urban areas. While there was some emphasis on the power sector as well in thermal and renewable energy sectors. So we can also observe a visible push towards the rural infrastructure, and that is particularly due to the migration of the laborers, which has shifted from some of the areas from Maharashtra and South Zone to UP, MP, and Jharkhand, Bihar sides. And particularly, you see, rural areas are we can see a clear-cut demand and increase in maybe the demand of steel and other materials, which is particularly depending on the Manrega and other schemes. So you see, having said this, Kalpataru is well placed with a presence in well diversified sectors. We are having a very significant presence in railways, highways, oil and gas, cross-country pipelines, transmissions and distribution, water, urban infrastructures, and other industrial and building EPC contracts. So having, you see, during this COVID scenario, we were having around 45,000 of laborers, because we are working basically on the EPC kind of contracts. So we are largely depending on the laborers and labor force. So I would say that, you see, we could able to manage and we could able to retain these around 80 to 90% manpower in our captive kind of a labor colonies and staff colonies. So of course, you see, that leads to a cost escalation, but that is how actually we have to manage. So having you see this presence in all kind of engineering and power transmission of and infrastructure, so we are consuming around 500,000 tons of steel in form of sections, TMTs, and plates. We are you see, running around as of now 130 sites in India of JMC and Capita and KPTL, and out of that I can say proudly that, you see, just after the COVID, we started from 50%, and now we are running around 90% sites with 90% of the strength of the manpower. So you see, in some of the cases wherein there was some migration from southern part to India. So see, our projects which are in Bihar, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, and Madhya Pradesh, so they are least affected. So maybe we can say that it's a blessing in disguise that we are having enough measure where you see our water projects, our there is no issue. Labor strength is concerned. So our progress and our utilization of this thing is quite satisfactory. Yeah, I can say that you see, as far as steel demand and pricing is concerned, so from my perspective, so on one side there is some kind of a increase in the iron around 5 to 6 or 7%, but there are some kind of a downwards of cooking coal pricing also. But I feel that you see, coupled with the improved operational efficiency and lower imports, this presents a good opportunity for the steel manufacturers for a consolidation as per the local demand. So I also, you see, assume that there would be opportunities to increase in the consumptions because I do not see any kind of a holdback or any kind of a economic slowdown as far as this sector is concerned. So I'm assuming that you see there would be increase in the consumptions in the various sectors, which is largely depending on the government policies. These are like automotive sectors, which Mr. Kakar was saying, there is going to be ultimately demand in the market. Apart from that, there are capital goods. So I can see a visibly around 10% demand growth in the capital goods as well. Apart from that, you see infrastructure sectors which includes airports. So there would be very huge developments in the tier 2 cities, in railways, and particularly in railways there are dedicated rail freight corridors and then metros, high speed railways. So that is going to come up. In this oil and gas also there is a demand in the cross country pipelines also. If you talk about the power, so you see, since last 2 years there is no substantial kind of a power plants addition. But you see, as far as Government of India, this electricity plan is there. So again, I can see there is maybe around 50-60,000 megawatt addition in the power sectors also, with maybe more than 100 plus gigawatt renewable energy sectors. So these all consist in the infrastructure sectors, and with that, you see, the demand of steel is going to increase, and as per that, you see, all the steel suppliers, manufacturers has to ramp up, and then they can go ahead with their plans of expansions. If we talk about the rural India, so I think this COVID gives an opportunity to really enhance the rural India vision of our Pradhan Mantri. So there are policies like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana and Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. So with that, there would be huge demand in infrastructures in the rural also. So with you see all these factors, I can fairly assume that you see our company is well positioned in all these sectors. We are having a balance, you see, because in all these sectors, whether we will talk about the railways and then water, infrastructure, and then highways, railways, so we are having a very strong presence there, and we are aligned and with the requirement and the demand of the steel. And you see, we are sure that our steel industry in India, the way they are you see managing all these shows since last 3-4 months, so there would be a demand in the steel, and then there would be consumptions as well also. So that is from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. So we move on to our next panelist, Mr. Vinay Shroff, EVP of Sales and Marketing, JSW Steel Limited. With 32 years of experience in the industry, Mr. Shroff has expanded JSW's reach to newer geographies in the international market. He has built the retail business for JSW Steel, making it one of the largest in India. Over to you, Mr. Shroff.
Thank you, Nikita, and good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon, my co-panelist. Thank you, SteelMint, for this wonderful opportunity. Before I begin, I want to say, obviously, be safe, take care of all your near and dear ones. And I think most importantly, start helping each other. A lot of people have lost lives, they have lost livelihoods. And the least we all can do is help each other get out of this situation we are in today. When we talk of this situation, if you look at how people have described it, the leading global financial institutions, including World Bank, IMF, and our own RBI, probably they have said this is the worst recession we are seeing in the last 100 years. Worse than what it was after World War II, worse than what it was after the Great Depression. It was important for me to make a mention of this so that we are all aware of the situation we are going through, and we should make sure that all possible ways and means we adopt to come out of it as soon as possible. Coming to the topic, Indian steel demand post-lockdown, I think before we move to that topic, it's important to know what is happening in the economy today. Most of the pundits have said that this year you'll see a GDP of India contract by about 5%. If that is the case and that is how it is going to be, obviously it is going to have a big impact on the steel industry and all of us. We in steel industry, we are being told, being made aware, we assume that there is going to be a demand contraction to the extent of about anywhere between 18 to 20%, and which means if last year consumption was upwards of 101 million tons, consumption this year can be anywhere between 80 to 83 million tons, roughly. We have already seen out of this 20 million tons, about 16 million tons contraction happening in the first 4 months. So that's a good as well as that's a bad thing to happen. The good part of it is that means the next 8 months, we are back to normal. We just got to make up for the balance 4 million tons, and hopefully we'll be able to beat pro rata last year consumption. We all know April lockdown, steel consumption point of view, historic low, just about 1 million tons. Fast forward to July, and obviously we are looking at a situation where we have reached almost about 70% of the total of what the consumption was in last year. Is that a recovery? We all want to believe that there is a recovery. There was a pent-up demand. And as Mr. Kakar also pointed out, automotive, there is a very positive scenario which is building up, whether it is the small compact passenger vehicles or two-wheelers. That is all really going to add to the consumption and the demand of steel. Another important point to note here is that in general, the inventory levels as far as the steel industry is concerned is almost at the same level as last year end, what we saw in the month of March. So therefore, there's not much of inventory which is there out there in the industry or with the user industry, which is a very good news. There's not much of cash which has got locked in. Capacity utilization, we know last year was around 77, 78%. July, we have seen it has reached about 63, 64%. So all the steel mills, definitely, including JSW Steel, we have been able to ramp up the production to make sure that whatever demand is coming from the domestic side, we are able to meet that without any problem. Till this demand in July, we saw this demand coming up in July. May onwards, most of the steel mills, including us, we had relied heavily on exports to try and make sure that we are able to ramp up our production for the demand which we are seeing now, which should come back to normal in a couple of months. Coming to on the infra side, just want to mention, if you look at the macro situation and people talk about NIP and the investments in infra, if the outlay of about 1.5 trillion, 111 lakh crore as per the NIP, it has to happen in the next 5 years. Maybe it will get pushed, but we all know that the next 5 years it might not be possible. If it gets pushed a little bit, we are looking at something of anywhere between 40 to 45 lakh crores investment in the next 2 to 3 years. That's practically double of what happened in the last 5 years, pro rata basis. So huge investments have been planned by the government. And I think that is something which we should all be aware of. If you look at a 5 trillion economy by 2025, or maybe 1 or 2 years down the line, that means the investment in the infrastructure sector will have to be double of that by 2030. So that the planning will have to be done much in advance for the economy to really kick up to 5 trillion by 2025-26. Rural demand, rural economy is shown obviously very positive, has been very positive. We have seen some indicators, a lot of indicators, in fact, whether it is the tractor sales, whether it is the two-wheeler sales, even the fertilizer sales, diesel consumption in the rural part, they all have gone up. And that is something which, plus looking at the way the monsoon is, hopefully the demand in the rural side should be able to maintain. Some estimates also say that the rural unemployment has come down compared to April. It was probably around 20% in April. It's come down to about 10%. Pre-COVID levels was about 5%. And that is the type of rural unemployment improvement which we have seen. You look at the banking sector, just to give a sense what is happening, the advances have gone up. And the advances have gone up in which sectors? The MSME sector, the infra sector, the agriculture sector, which means the rural side. All this is really going to help in improve the demand as far as steel is concerned. We all know that some of the corporate results we have seen in the Q1, definitely pharmaceutical sector, FMCG, IT, they have all shown positive. The ones on which steel is heavily dependent has obviously in Q1 not been so healthy. They have all been able to now get out of it. And as Gupta ji was mentioning, that looking forward to something in the infra sector where the steel is about 60% consumption should start improving. Automotive, we have heard Mr. Kakar in terms of, and I can say that is a great recovery, which we are all hoping should happen in the automotive sector. You look at from a little bit on the pricing front, the way things are happening globally, we see the global sentiments have been very positive. Probably global prices have reached the pre-COVID levels, riding high on because of the China demand. A little bit on China, what the estimates are and what the assumptions are. The stimulus of 540 billion, which China has planned for this year, they have already spent 60% of that. Compared that to India, we have just spent about 10 to 12%. So if you really want to move fast, and I won't say to catch up with China, but really move fast, we'll have to increase our spend, fast forward, front load the infrastructure spend in the next couple of months to be able to really speed up the demand. Perspective of the domestic demand, as I said, we are looking at in the next couple of months, gradual recovery should happen. And hopefully after the monsoon, post the festive season, we are looking at a demand which should get back to normal, what we have seen in the past. I think I've got, from my side, most of these things covered. Some of the important measures which we feel the government should take and government should initiate is, and it's in a situation when there is a global pandemic, is definitely we need to support the Atmanirbhar with policies which should prevent the imports to an extent where it is not really required. Concessional tariffs is something which we should look at. The government request, they have done enough. They are looking at doing enough for improving the demand, but simultaneously, I think some of these policy matters will help. Front loading and fast tracking of the projects I already mentioned. Initiatives like Atmanirbhar, this is something very important, and we are looking forward to riding on this Atmanirbhar to ensure that we are able to meet the demand here. So all in all, from an overall perspective of the steel industry, I think if I have to sum it up, I'll say historic low in April, reaching 70% in July, gradual recovery. We already see that is started happening. Hopefully by the month of October, November, we should get back to normal. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shroff. Moving on to the next panelist. Next panelist is Mr. Ranjan Dhar. He's Chief Marketing Officer at ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India. He spent 20 years in this industry, and in the erstwhile company SR Steel, he has worked across a range of functions. So he has either set up divisions or held many different roles. And examples of these are regional business head for North, South, and West India, head automotive steel, head construction steel, national sales head, head hot rolled products, head coated steel, VP and chief marketing officer of iron ore pellets business. So in the current role, he looks at all of the sales and marketing operations of both the domestic and the foreign markets. It's over to you, Mr. Dhar.
Thank you, Ruchira, and wish health and safety for everyone watching this webinar today. Happy to share the panel with two of my close customers, Maruti and Kalpataru, and the colleague from industry, Vinay. So, good afternoon to everyone. Keeping with this topic of today's webinar is that how has steel demand been in the backdrop of the pandemic? I would first touch upon that topic and then probably what we should do. Steel demand, as Mr. Shroff said, that April was a total demand destruction. Industry operated below 15% average production. And May was a month of stabilization and coming back on our feet. And since June, I think pretty much entire industry has ramped up between 70% to 100% of the capacity. That is how the production side has happened. Now, about the domestic demand, we had at AMNS done some assumptions of how the demand will pan out post pandemic scenario. And we had said if you divided the segments of steel consumption in India into automotive, pipes and tubes, yellow goods, farm equipment, yellow goods and green goods, white goods and retail. So our assumption was that between June to August, automotive will range between 35% to 50%, and pipe and tube between 55 to 70%. Yellow goods between 25 to 60%. The farm and tractors, we were little bullish. We said that it will be between 70 to 80%. And retail and trade between 65 to 70%. And what actually has happened in this period, and we have noticed in this period a very strong V-shaped recovery across all these segments. So we have seen auto, as Mr. Kakar was saying earlier, the recovery in the passenger car is close to about 85%, barring the exception of commercial vehicle where the recovery is still close to about 50% or slightly below 50%. The two-wheeler and the passenger car, they have all recovered 80-85% or more. Pipe and tube has recovered nearly 90% or 95%. Yellow goods 80%. Tractors are actually beyond 100%. And white goods and retail and trade have also come back to around 80% to 100% level. So what has happened in this period of time is that Indian steel industry, learning from the shock of April, everybody went into booking in international markets, doing more exports. And as the domestic demand is recovering back, as each one of us are witnessing recovery of domestic demand, the export volumes is going down. So fresh bookings are going down, or fresh bookings are getting severely reduced to cater to the domestic demand. So all this is good. Whether we should be happy about this? Yes, we should be happy about it. Whether we should be satisfied? I would say definitely no. The reason is that we should use this issue of pandemic, which has hit us, hit everybody, and it has also has hit India, as a moment of coming down from running on the treadmill to taking a pause and seeing what we can do as a nation to take the next big leap. If we do not do that, we will be always into this, we have been discussing this number, as Mr. Kakar said yesterday. I mean, just a few moments back, I was also hearing somebody else yesterday that, cars per 1,000 in India is 22. So it has not moved. It has moved very slightly in last 5 years. So if we have to move from 22 to 170 of China, or even 75 of Thailand, or even 40 of Indonesia. So there is certain thing different that needs to be done in India, and that what we need to do differently is not to look at the numbers for country as a whole, because when we look at GDP, we become happy that India is the 5th largest economy in the world. But if you compare it at per capita level, then we fall down to 122 level. So I think for the dispensable income in India to grow, and that will lead the growth of economy as a whole, what needs to be done in India, in a country like India, is big infra-led economic growth. And I think there is where the push lies. And while a lot of things have been done, but the structure of our country is such that everything gets, stuck somewhere or the other. Example, and I think my friend from Kalpataru will concur with that, is infra company take a project from the EPC take project from the state governments. State government do get, these are funded projects. They get funds, but the funds get diverted into various things, either farm loan waivers or something else. And these funds do not go back to the infrastructure side. And then there are payment delays and all that. Though the projects are awarded, they do not get completed in time. So many issues, land issues are there. Also, all these delay issues are there. So one project which is scheduled to be completed in 3 years takes about 20 years to complete, or 15 years to complete. So this drags down the economic growth of a country as a whole. I think a structural reform is needed in all these aspects, because I personally believe for us to create a virtuous cycle of this growth, infra-led growth of the country has to be done, which will increase the per capita income of the people of the country, and each and every sector will then grow. The automobile will grow, the capital goods will grow, housing will grow. I think there's where the initial push is needed. One good solution for that could be, I keep on thinking, that why cannot there be a finance company, a special finance company, a project finance company, or an infrastructure finance company, which can discount these bills of supplies to government. If there's a pipeline supplied to the state government, or any other project supplied to the state government, why cannot these bills be discounted? The companies get their money in time, and the projects get completed in time. And if that happens, more and more companies will come and participate into infrastructure development of the country. So these are all my thoughts. Happy to take more questions on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dhar. So today we had another speaker, Mr. Nalin Gupta, MD of J. Kumar Infra Projects Limited. And unfortunately, he couldn't join us. So he has expressed his regrets. He hasn't been keeping well, so he could not join us today. So we'll start off a question and answer round, and I'll hand over to my colleague, Nikita. She has a set of questions for Maruti Suzuki, Mr. Kakar. So Nikita, please go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Kakar, we would like to know a few questions. What is the steel import percentage of Maruti Suzuki India Limited, and what type of grades you are currently importing?
I think basically, as far as our steel buying is concerned, totally we are having around 11% import content. That is the kind of extent of imports which we are doing. And if you see the kind of steel which we are importing, they are basically all galvanized steel. Then we have got high tensile steels. Then there are some special grade steels which are also still imported. So these are the ones which we, as I was telling, that we need to increase our engagement and have the localization of the same.
What is the shift in trend for steel usage in the automobile industry?
I think as far as regulations are coming, so it is very clearly coming out that whether in terms of crash or even in terms of weight of the vehicle, that we are targeting to be reduced day by day. So that trend is quite evident, which means that high tensile strength will be one of the things which penetration has already increased in our cars. Like if we see the latest model which are coming up, there the high tensile content is increasing a lot. So that is something which is the change which we are finding. Also in terms of corrosion, we are finding that galvanized steel will be the one which is really preferred going forward. So that also will be the future trend as far as car industry goes.
And we would also like to know your expectation from the Indian steel industry.
I think very clearly, as I told, that the way we are increasing our volumes in the current situation. So first is very clearly on the supply front, there should be continuity so that we can meet the demand of the market. That is very clearly there. Then second, I think for us, focus area remains about the localization. So now I think going forward, we have to see how we can collaborate and have those also grades localized, which up till now, because of volume front or investment front, we have been postponing the decisions. So even if it calls for some kind of, say, understanding, that can also be developed with a view that if steel industry is making some specific investments for us, so we can definitely develop an understanding on the maybe medium term or long term procurement. So those kind of things will really help both of us to have a win-win.
Thank you. Over to you, Ruchira, for the next set of questions, please.
Right. So my question is to Mr. Shroff and Mr. Dhar. So Mr. Kakar just mentioned that it would be really very nice if there's an import substitution. So how well positioned are you to manufacture these steels? He mentioned high tensile steels and also corrosion resistance steels. So are you in a good shape to make investments and cater to this market, and remove exports from the auto sector? Starting from Mr. Dhar.
Okay. So Maruti Suzuki and all the other auto manufacturers in the country are our prime customers, are the prime customers of AMNS. So we are in very close and deep discussion with all the auto companies and the future trends of steel. As everyone knows, the management of the company is new at AMNS. So we have got two global giants coming into this company, ArcelorMittal and Nippon Steel. They, in their own right, have developed all the auto grades of the steel in the world, the futuristic grade. So we are in discussion with Maruti also and also other auto manufacturers. So we have drawn a plan of all the steel that would be needed by the auto company, not only today, but up to 2030 and beyond. So we are making a big investment for the auto grade steel to cater to all the requirement. Even today, I think Indian steel industry has got capacity to cater to 95 or 99% of the demand that is there in the auto sector. But what we are doing at AMNS is also investing for the futuristic steel, the future steel which will be needed. And I think big investments are already planned, and you will soon have a media announcement also on that, probably in next 6 months or in that time horizon.
Thank you. And Mr. Shroff,
I also want to add to that one more point is that Indian steel industry in general and in general and also AMNS, we always work in a very symbiotic way with the auto industry. Like currently, the needs of the auto industry in the post-lockdown phase or in the pandemic phase, we have been appreciative of the concerns of the auto industry and have supported in many ways, even Mr. Kakar would be aware.
Right. Mr. Shroff, how about you? How about JSW? How quickly will you be able to supply special steels that a company like Maruti Suzuki needs so that they don't need to export and not look beyond companies like JSW and ArcelorMittal?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ruchira. I'm sure all of you are aware that JSW Steel has a technical collaboration with JFE Steel in Japan, one of the leading automotive steel suppliers in the world. So from a technical capability perspective, I think JSW Steel is parallel to the best in the world to be able to supply to the requirement of the automotive industry. We were also the first ones in India literally to be able to supply the galvanized steel, galvanneal, to the automotive industry. Not only that, as Ranjan was mentioning, the steel industry typically works very, very closely with the automotive industry to be able to meet their requirements, current and future requirements. The recent new entrants in the automotive car manufacturer industry, they are our customers. So we work with the automotive industry well in advance, gauge their requirement based on our technical capability, and this along with the alliance partner. I think we are in one of the best positions to be able to supply anything which is emerging, likely to emerge in the future from the automotive sector.
Right. Thank you. And my next question is to Mr. Gupta. There are many stalled projects in the construction sector and all of the wider infrastructure sector. So after this pandemic and the gradual reopening of the economy, what is the status of these stalled projects? Will they start to move fast, or will there still be constraints?
You see, if I compare pre-COVID and then the post-COVID, yes, there are definitely improvement in since last 2 months of June and July. I think we see, in spite of the monsoon in certain parts of India, the projects are actually not stalled as used to be in the monsoon in previous years. So I can see a visibly shift of around 2 months due to the that is a monsoon effect on the infra projects actually. So of course our Q2 demand, you see that Q2 demand is on year-to-year basis is expected to be lower, maybe around 25 to 30%. But if I compare, you see, with respect to the last year's monsoon season, so this is almost 25% more than last year. At Calcutta level, you see our overall order booking is very, very, you see, on the same line which used to be as per the March financial year 20. So considering, you see, the slowdown in the Q1, we are expecting a growth in the Q2, and then we are going to be very, very positive in the next quarters of Q3 and Q4. So we are quite hopeful that, you see, ultimately at the end of this financial year, we would be able to achieve the way we planned it.
Right. So that's a lot of optimism out there. So for the next set of questions, I hand over to Nikita on. So these will be questions on the supply side of it.
I would like to first ask Mr. Ranjan Dhar for the questions on supply outlook. Is there a supply tightness for prompt deliveries and thinner gauge HRC?
No, I would not say there is supply tightness. And I will like to be candid and frank on that. What happens is that, as I said, we had, after the demand destruction of April, I think we at AMNS, and I assume everybody else in the industry, we engaged with all the regular customers and took the projection of the demand up to September. Because we were ramping up production and we had to fill the order book. Our first priority was always to cater to the domestic demand. That is the first priority. So we have kept the capacities available for the domestic demand basis the projection that we received from various industries, from various customers and the segments. We had also kept even the buffer margin on that. And basis that, some export was booked, frankly. Now, as I was telling you, there has been a V-shaped recovery, and I hope that continues. Because of that V-shaped recovery, the demand recovery in the country happened more than the expectation, not only of the steel industry, also of the customers operating in those segments. So, but now, having said that, what is happening is we have also deferred some export shipments to cater to the domestic demand. And going forward, as we see the robustness of demand continuing in the country, the export volumes will be reduced, and we have no issues in catering to whatever demand of the domestic customer. Even today, there is no supply side issue. We are catering to all the demand that is there in the domestic market, because we are shifting one vessel or two vessels on the exports and ensuring that there is no demand which is unmet in the domestic market.
Thank you. So apart from the supply tightness, are there any factors that are keeping the prices supported?
I think Mr. Shroff mentioned that, and Mr. Gupta also mentioned that earlier, is see the prices of steel follow a global trend. Globally, the prices have gone up by more than $120 or $130 in last 2 months or 3 months. SteelMint, I'm sure you must be also monitoring it. So, that price movement which has happened because of the demand from Southeast Asian countries, also China, and the raw material pack movement which has happened, that is keeping the prices high globally, not only in India. It is not an Indian phenomena. It is a global phenomena. Prices have moved up globally, barring the exception of US probably, where I see the prices have not gone up or they have come down. Other than US, prices have gone up everywhere. And so it has gone up in India.
Thank you. Over to you, Ruchira.
Right. So picking the thread of prices, I'd like to know from both the producers. We've been hearing a lot about price increases, that there will be another round of an increase. So what have both ArcelorMittal and JSW Steel planned? Is there another price hike coming soon? And how much could that really be at? So Mr. Dhar, starting from you.
I think frankly, while we all try to get happy that we are doing the prices are decided by the market. We actually, whatever is the prices of the market, whether it is up or down or same, we will have to follow that, whether we like it or not. So because India does not produce so much steel in the world that we can dominate the prices. So I think whether the price will go up further, we don't know. The things are looking, as of now, there is a gap between international prices and domestic prices. From that perspective, it looks it will go up further. But we will follow the market. I think the best judge and the best determining factor of the price movement is the market itself. If steel industries could decide the price would have never fallen.
So Mr. Shroff, how about you? What is your gauge of the market? Where is the inclination towards a hike or a flat, let's say, in the coming quarter?
Right. So Indian steel prices are not decoupled with international. And if you really look at 3 factors, one is the iron ore prices. They have really gone up substantially. You look at the Chinese steel prices. As Ranjan said, they have also gone up significantly. We are in the first week of February levels. And also, if you look at the Chinese demand, if it continues the way it is, and if you really look at these 3 factors, then I think everybody is looking at a situation where there is an optimism, both not only in terms of price, but in terms of demand from a sentiment perspective. It's more important for the demand in the country to be sustained. There has to be a gradual recovery which brings the demand back to the levels we would want it to be. And I think the price then subsequently follows the demand, apart from the international scenario which has got built up. Except US, prices across the world have risen by roughly about 20% in the last couple of months. We have seen that. So I think we are not decoupled from that perspective. And as long as the demand continues to rise, I think we are good.
So, Mr. Gupta, what do you have to say about the price hikes? Is the construction sector happy to take it, or do you think there might be some capping in the demand if it continues to rise?
Yeah, you see, construction sectors is already suffering with the, kind of a cost escalations during of all these projects due to the labor issues and then productivity issues and other factors also. This is a significant portion of, steel is a significant portion of our cost. As Mr. Ranjan as Mr. Vinay is saying that, see, they are expecting a rise in the pricing due to the demand. But you see, I feel that there is a market is quite dynamic actually. I also agree with Mr. Vinay that you see this is Indian scenario is perfectly linked with the overall scenario. So I would expect, and then you see that you see demand because demand is there, but ultimately this is depending on the utilization and the productivity levels of also. So price may go up, but I feel that, you see, that won't be able to sustain so much actually. I'm not expecting a huge increase in the pricing, because maybe next Q3 and Q2 and Q3 there has to be a pressure on the pricing part also, and that is what actually I expect, and that is what actually if you see overall scenario of the projects, if we see overall leveraging of the projects, and then workability point of view, the price may go up, but may not be so much actually. We need to make a balance between the demand, because demands are not substantial. That has to be kind of within a certain limits, and accordingly pricing will be fluctuating maybe for the next Q3 and Q4.
If I may add one point,
Sure.
see, I think one important aspect of buying domestically by all the users is that we do not do a one size fit all pricing for the entire industry. If there's a project requirement, let us say for Kalpataru, or there is a automotive requirement, each segment follows a different price pattern. Auto segment price will get fixed for 6 months. Projects, when the projects are bagged by the construction companies, they do a back-to-back contract with the steel mills for that project at a fixed price for the fixed quantity. So I think the benefit of buying locally is that there is this flexibility in the pricing, the way each segment pricing is done. And I think that is a big benefit. As I said, there is a big symbiotic relationship that exists. And I think I would urge, even from our company perspective and also steel industry perspective, that more and more this thing should be done. And in fact, auto industry has done a big shift. I think earlier around, as Mr. Kakar was also saying, 20-30% imports used to happen in auto industry. That has come down to about 8 to 10%. Thanks to the auto industry, and also thanks to the investments made by the steel industry in India to build those capacities. So if this symbiotic relationship continues, and we always give example of Japan, then together that will be a win-win, and the prices will become immaterial because you'll add value to it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dhar, for that. And over to you, Nikita, for the next set of questions.
I have some questions to Mr. Ranjan Dhar and Mr. Shroff. These are the policy-related matters. What is your opinion on border adjustment tax put up as a measure to safeguard Indian industry?
Yeah, so this is a request from the steel industry to create a level playing field. So all such items, all such cesses that we have, electric cess or many other cess, coal cess, which when you do a like-to-like comparison, it is not there in the other countries from where the imports come into India. So if these imports are coming from these countries wherein the tax structure is different from India, what is being requested logically is to bring that at parity. It is nothing as simple as that, unless Vinayji has more to say on.
No, absolutely. I think you said it all. It is basically to bring in parity and create a level playing field, so that some of the disadvantages we have today by nature of the way things are from the economic perspective, that gets taken care of. So I think it's more from that perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Dhar. How are the infrastructure projects performing, considering investments announced by the government under the National Infrastructure Pipeline? Mr. Shroff, if you could answer this question, please.
Right. No, I think the government has taken a lot of initiative in the last couple of months, keeping in view this pandemic. A lot of projects, especially the road projects, transmission tower, railway projects, they have really been able to kickstart all over again, push it, fast forward it. Having said that, a lot more needs to be done in terms of front loading the whole project, so that the demand comes in early and we are able to get out of the current situation what we are in. That is one. And second, the funding part of it will have to be really ensured, because we all know the state of funds as far as the state governments are concerned. They are really struggling, keeping in view that the lockdown has been for nearly 3 to 4 months now. So the central funding is very, very critical. And the government will have to really come up and ensure that all these critical projects, the ones which have not yet started, start getting funded by the central government so that the demand gets generated fast. It is very imperative that in the next 3 to 4 months, all these infrastructure projects, the fund starts flowing in and the demand gets generated for the steel demand to really come back to the normal levels.
I think Mr. Shroff has covered it, but I will only say that, in India, we do announce many projects, whether new Bombay airport has been announced, yet it has been announced, So we do announce many projects, but the time it takes, I'll repeat that point, the time it takes to execute that, I think we need to focus over there. Unless and until we do not execute projects in time, we will not see this country having infrastructure development and the investments fructify in the way it has been planned. Now, whether the delay happens because of land issues, because of state funding issues, other issues, but I think our track record on delivery on the time is very poor. I think that is where the focus is needed.
Right. I think, Nikita, we have asked a lot of our own questions, and we can move now to the audience. And some questions have already started coming in, and they are pretty specific in nature. I'll post the first one across. And this is from Mr. Stelish Golas. He's asking, how is the payment recovery from private and government departments? Are you completing old tenders, or are you closing new tenders also? Mr. Gupta, can you answer this? You work a lot with government departments and also do the private projects. So can you take this question?
So you see, let me tell you, I think this was a kind of a abnormal scenario actually from the kind of support actually which government provided to all the EPC contractors. I think you see both the government projects and private as well are quite supportive during this period specifically. In you see certain areas, if you talk about railways and highways, government has given payments before the milestones. They release the payments like you see in terms of the retention money, in terms of the PBGs, just releasing of the bank guarantees. So they always ensured that you see all these kind of projects should be on. All these subcontractors and then EPC contractors should survive during this period. So there was a great support from the government sides. During this scenario, we got the payment from the government and private as well, and that is how actually we could do the payments to our suppliers as well. Because you see, we are importing, so we are buying a lot of steels and a lot of other materials. So I can proudly say that during this period, we could get a sufficient amount of payments from the clients, and then we could deliver the payments to our suppliers as well. So there was this great support from the government side, as well as these privates also. So no issue. Of course, there was some kind of a marginal impact in the payments to the steel suppliers, but because you see, we were working together, we were working as a partner. So, and both of the partners are, you see, at the verge of survivals. So I think we could manage that. And I'm sure, you see, for the next few quarters, at least for the next 2 quarters, there is a question of survival. And we all will survive going all together.
Right. Thank you very much. I'd like to draw the attention of the participants to a poll that might have popped up on your windows. It's a really brief one, so it'll be wonderful if you could answer that and submit that. It's going to help SteelMint to improve the quality of its webinars. Thank you. The next question is from Mr. Aditya Agarwal, and he is asking what efforts are Maruti and JSW taking to reduce the carbon footprint and to adopt modules like the solar method to generate their power. So, Mr. Shroff, could you answer this question?
No, absolutely. I think JSW in its DNA has got this sustainability very, very deeply impregnated, if I can say. We are a zero discharge company, liquid effluent discharge company. We have taken all possible measures, including solar, including waste disposal, to make sure that everything gets consumed within our plant. There's a conservation we do here in the next to the Bombay plant we have. So from a sustainability perspective, I think different projects at different plants, depending on the local environment, that is something we have initiated, we have undertaken, and it is not now. It is, and for example, in our Vijayanagar, Karnataka plant, our motto has been 1 tree for every ton of steel produced. So some of these, all these initiatives definitely has helped reduce the carbon footprint significantly. And we are continuously, we have adopted that, and continuously we have said that this is something that we will not let go down. So that is one of our top agenda priorities, so as to say.
Thank you very much for
question.
that. Yes, Nikita.
Yes.
Your
Our
turn.
next question is one of one of our attendees. It's specifically asking Mr. Kakar. As Mr. Kakar, you mentioned that Maruti is seeing a spurt in small car sales. Are they seeing year-on-year growth in these categories in July, September? By how much can they expect in July, September this year over last year?
Sorry, can you just repeat? Are you asking about percentage growth for these segments? Huh?
Yes, sir. Year-on-year growth in July, September in comparison to the last year.
Yeah, I think as I told, in the month of July, we have just touched the last year numbers, which was July of last year, in terms of overall totality. And going forward, as I told, it will be recovering. Like we have touched 1,01,000 cars as far as current July is concerned. Going next month is 115,000. Then going forward, it will be 145. So this is a kind of projection for 3 months, which we already have as a firm thing. And of course, for quarter 3 and quarter 4, if we see, we are talking about quarter 4 of the current financial year, which will be more than the quarter 4 of the last year. So that is what I can assure, that it will be more than the last year. That is what we are expecting as a projection.
Thank you, Mr. Kakar.
Okay, I have one question from Mr. Rakesh Singhal, who is consultant with SRTMI, and he's asking, the housing sector, especially affordable housing and PMAY, has huge demand potential. What are initiatives by Steel Demand to promote steel-based construction? So could both JSW and ArcelorMittal executives answer this? Starting from you, Mr. Dhar.
It's a very interesting topic, actually. What we are doing it from ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel perspective is, we are, in fact, recently, about a month back, we have initiated discussion with all the PEB manufacturers, the prefabricated steel building manufacturers in the country, to actually launch an initiative to cater to the housing demand. I've said this earlier, that we need in India a mass manufacturing of houses the way it is done in Western countries. There are specific modular designs, and those are factory built, and that those can be shifted to the site, and the house gets ready in 6 months time. So it has many benefits. It has a benefit of the time. It also has a benefit of skilling up the human resource. The Skill India initiative can very well be pushed if we do steel-based housing construction in India. I think it has to be adapted. It is a new thing, because the ecosystem of India, unfortunately, when you move away from city or even within city, is very cement-based, rudimentary design, cement-based design, and all that. So I think it needs to move away from that if we need to get the scale up, and if we need to get the timelines, met. So I think this initiative we have taken with the PEB manufacturers. Again, from the ArcelorMittal perspective, as our part owner of our company, certain new initiatives are being launched in the country. Stelligence is the steel with intelligence. Stelligence is one initiative. It is under development. It is already implemented in Europe. We are trying to see how do we implement this in India. It is a very detailed talk. I will not waste everybody's time now. If somebody is interested, can reach out to me. I can explain about it more. Thank you.
Mr. Shroff, steel-based construction. When are we
Yes,
going to see
absolutely.
buildings made out of steel, and won't they be too hot to live in?
Oh, too hot to live in. Not really. Will be cool. JSW Steel has been, I'm sure most of you would be aware that we have really partnered with one of the leading manufacturers, steel building manufacturers of UK, Severfield. We have a partnership with them in India, and this is with the intention of promoting steel based buildings and construction. I think from a value in use perspective, if you really look at from that perspective, there is no other better construction material than steel. It is just that the initial so-called cost, which most of the people in India really look at, that is something which we need to change to value and use. And JSW Steel is working towards that along with Severfield to ensure that we move towards value and use. People understand about the value and use. Once people do understand, then I don't think there is anything which comes in the way of using a steel-based industry and construction. The other thing is in terms of which gets covered in value and use is even if you look at small structures today, which are typically people have started moving to steel-based. After some years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, you still get value, which probably would be more than what you really invested in the first place when you build that structure, small structure. That is in cement, you don't get anything. So I think once we move towards this concept of value and use, really not look at the initial cost which is involved, then I think India should be able to graduate to a steel-based construction.
Nikita?
Thank you. So with this, we move on to the next question. This is from Mr. Rao, Metal One India. How can India's per capita steel consumption be increased quickly on fast-track basis? Mr. Shroff, if you could answer this.
Yes. See, I think it requires a cumulative effort from almost everybody who are the stakeholders within the steel industry. As a consumer, as I just mentioned, we need to start looking at value and use, start respecting that concept, and move towards saving resource of water, of sand, which goes along with the cement construction. So if we move towards that, everybody, whether we are doing in a small construction or a large construction, I think that is something which the moment we start doing it, steel consumption will start going up. Similarly, if you look at any other construction or usage of steel, whether it is in automotive. Now, today we know two-wheelers, four-wheelers, as Mr. Kakar said, small cars. That is something which is increasing. That will also aid to the per capita steel consumption. So I think it's every stakeholder of the steel industry, the user as well as the manufacturer. We need to move towards a situation where we look at replacing the current construction material. You look at roads, you look at bridges, you look at anything, you name it. That is something which we'll have to work towards replacing it with steel in the near term. Then only the consumption will go up. That's my viewpoint.
Thank you. Ruchira, can we have the next question, please?
So I have a question from Mr. Sushil Banerjee, and this is for Mr. Kakar. So Mr. Banerjee is asking, is Maruti planning for an EV in the coming years? So Mr. Kakar, could you please give us an update on the electric vehicle plan for Maruti?
Yeah, I think as far as the EVs are concerned, of course, it was under discussion and probably some plans were also made. We also had made one of the models with the EV this thing but basically, if you see as on today, I think the most important is to really see how the market is going to respond in terms of volumes and the customer preferences. Because today, I think in the current circumstances where probably the business certainties are not there, even in terms of jobs, probably people are not so comfortable. And if we talk about EV, just to give you one example, like if we talk about our WagonR, conversion to gasoline to electric vehicle, the price is almost becoming double. So that is the kind of impact which the battery has. So I think in the current circumstances, I don't think people will be really keen to spend so much of money. So I think we really need to see for another 1 year or so, or maybe 1 or 2 years, how the economic condition really improves. And again, when we talk about EV, it is not only the vehicle. You have to think about the infrastructure for charging. So those kind of things may not be in the current priority for maybe the government or other things. So let the things get stabilized. And then we need to wait and watch and quickly see how it can happen. Because one of the factors is also, if we see globally, other than China, maybe other countries also, the penetration has not become really significant. So that is our view as of now.
Nikita?
The next question is, what is the status of steel inventory with mills at end July, and what is the outlook on production for August?
Yeah, I think steel industry, steel inventories are very low. In fact, you see there have been record sales done by all the mills. We had a number even from Steel Authority of India. They're now represented here today. They did 1.5 million record sales. So both due to exports and due to recovery of demand in the domestic, the inventory levels have gone down significantly. How much it is, I don't have the exact number, but I think if we compare, my guess is, if we compare the inventory level, say of the end March versus today, they would have gone down by around 40-50% is my guess. I don't have the exact number at the moment. And sorry, what was the second part of the question? I missed. What was the second part of the question?
Yes, I'm just coming to that. What is the outlook on production for August month?
Yeah, I think August, AMNS has been producing full capacity of pre-COVID level from June onwards. I think what we hear from the market is industry is almost at the full capacity, but Mr. Shroff can give the details for the other.
No, absolutely. Just to add on to what Mr. Ranjan said, if you look at the recent JPC reports, the inventory levels in the industry are same as what it was probably the entire industry around 31st March of last year. I'm talking about 31st March 2019 levels, which was a very normal inventory level, and I'll say on the lower side. So inventory in general has been in, if you can say, in control, and the production ramp up in the mill started from May onwards. May, we know domestic demand was just picking up, mills exported, therefore the inventory built up did not really happen. However, it helped in ensuring that the production ramp up reaches to the maximum level. So we are all, I think, JSW Steel is also in line to ensure maximum utilization and the capacity levels.
I think safe to say that August level will be close to the January level. If January was the full month, 31 days month before the lockdown, I think August will be close to that level.
Thank you.
Question for Mr. Gupta. The government has a national infrastructure pipeline plan and with a budget of 102 lakh crore. So I would like to know from you, we've been talking about the government not spending enough in the infrastructure projects. So how much of this has been spent or has been earmarked, and which are the key projects here that we should be mapping ready to see the progress of how the national infrastructure pipeline moves forward? Mr. Gupta?
Yeah, you see, I won't be able to comment on, you see, how much is earmarked by the government for this infra, because you see, I think pre-COVID scenario, there was a number which is astronomically high and which is not practically possible. But I can see a visible thrust actually on certain sectors, which I mentioned actually during my brief also. And there are sectors, especially railways. Railways, you see, they are, apart from the railway infra, they are also opening up the railway O&M also, because they are going to heading towards the privatization of the railway. So instead of, you see, converting from the railway authorities to the private, they are giving additional responsibility. The way, you see, the way airlines are being managed, so they are also they're also, you see, working towards the railways. So in my opinion, railway is one of the sector which is going to see a huge jump maybe for the next 1 decade actually, because there is a huge requirement in the railways. Another is the highways. So I can see, because highway is one of the, you see, infra booster dose actually, because we are not able to see the, you see, impact of highways since last 2 months, because due to the monsoon season. But I'm sure the way government has supported to all the EPC contractors, this is going to result in a, you see, really speed up of all the stalled projects in highways. You see, apart from certain parts of Maharashtra, like if you talk about the Simriddhi or some kind of a MTHL which is in Maharashtra, I can see there would be a huge jump in the highways also. Again, there would be one more sector, which is water. See, water is like if you are making a cross country pipeline for the water, but again, you see, as per the this Pradhan Mantri vision, he is going to supply and he is going to make available the power and water up to the last mile in the villages. So in the water division, apart from the cross country, they are going to have a huge thrust on the PDS, public distribution system, wherein you see all these pipelines. So whether you talk about the MS or DI, there is going to be huge demand in PDA systems, and that will also supported by the increased demand in the cement sectors, because you see, for that you need to make these water tankers, this water tank also. So these are the three sectors actually which I can see that as per the announcement of our you see, pre-COVID, that there will be more than like you see, they announced more than 100 lakhs crores of rupees. But I can see that you see, these sectors would see a clear jump and clear investment from the government side, and that is going to really benefit to all these EPC contractors in this country, and then you see suppliers from whether you talk about the steel or cement or everybody. So you see, I'm quite positive, and you see, this again, this COVID scenario has given a kind of a really think process, and you see, an approach from the government and from everybody, which is again reinforced by all these schemes of Atmanirbhar, and then you see, Make in India and all these things in the backdrop of the China issues. So ultimately, this is going to benefit to at least to all of us in India.
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you, Mr.
So, Nikita, I think we have time enough for just maybe one last question from your side, and then we could close this webinar. Thank you.
So the last question, we'd like to proceed. With the price hike in raw material sustain, will the price hike in raw material sustain, especially for iron ore, growth globally and in the domestic market? This is a question by Deepak Chaudhary. Mr. Shroff, would you like to answer this question?
See, the way at least we look at it is, as long as China is kicking and running the way it is doing, the way the stimulus of nearly 540 billion in infra is being spent, if that's something which continues unabated, then I think the production of steel in China will continue to do well. As long as that is something which will happen, the iron ore prices definitely should be in line with the finished steel prices, along with iron ore prices, should be range bound at a level which is always on the positive side. So I think a lot depends on the way the demand in China has panned out, and if it continues, it should definitely remain positive. That's the way broadly I think we should look at it. That's my view.
Thank you, Mr. Shroff. So with this, we come to the end of the webinar. On behalf of SteelMint, I would like to show my appreciation to all the panelists for having joined us for this enlightening session. Thank you to all the participants for joining us. We will send you the link to this webinar recording, which will be active on YouTube very soon. Do stay tuned for the upcoming webinars. Thank you all. Stay safe.
Thank you.